Singing to rely. Hi everyone. I hope you're having a good day. I've got the song Bound for Botany Bay stuck in my head because we're talking about a really sad story today. Sadly, it's a true story, and it's part of Australia's history that we tend to neglect to talk about. But anyway, hello, happy Friday. We made it to the end of another week. I hope you have had a wonderful week. Welcome back to my channel. If it's your first time visiting, well, hello. Thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate you spending your valuable time at my tiny little corner of YouTube. How is your Friday going? Good, I hope. If it's not, I am very sorry. So let's hang out together, spend some quality time. And in case anyone is wondering why I have an L plate hanging in the background, I'm a learner streamer. I'm not going to take it off until I reach 500 subs. Like I say every morning, I don't make the rules. Good morning, everybody. G'day, Kane. Hi, Keely. That is such good news about your lad. We're all dead proud of him. G'day, Daz. Hi, Lurker. G'day, JP. Hi, Simon. Hi, Carl. How are you all today? Yes, happy Friday. I hope you've all got great plans for the weekend. Today, we are going to be talking about the Neptune. It was known as the hell ship of the Death Fleet. It's, like I said, it's a really sad story, and it's a true story, unfortunately. 424 male and 78 female convicts from England being transported to the new colony of New South Wales were to be transported on to Australia on what became known as the Hell Ship, in, for its part in probably one of the darkest chapters in Australian history. G'day, Nicole King. The first fleet from 1787 to 1788 arrived in New South Wales with a mortality rate of 5.4%. The second fleet arrived in New South Wales with a mortality rate of 40%. So it's no surprise that the second fleet was known as the Death Fleet, and that Neptune is known as the Hell Ship. This mortality rate, one that would be the highest in the history of transportation, was so shocking that even by the punitive standards of the late 1700s, that discussions were held in the British Parliament about it, and they weren't exactly known for caring. Sir Charles Bunbury's resolutions respecting convicts for transportation from 1793, the Parliamentary History of England, stated, out of 500 passengers on board the Neptune, but 42 were able to crawl over the ship's side. The rest were carried, and 8 out of every 10 died at Sydney Cove. The details of the sufferings of these wretched convicts were equal to any endured in any slave ship. Neptune was one of the ships that sailed to Botany Bay in the Second Fleet. The Second Fleet's ships were Neptune, Surprise, Scarborough, the storeship Justinian, and it sailed from England on the 19th of January 1790. It was 6 months after the departure of the notorious floating brothel, the scandalous Lady Juliana, which was also considered part of the Second Fleet. The ships that made up the Second Fleet were the Lady Juliana, which was a convict transport ship, and its ship's master was Thomas Edgar. It had no male prisoners. It had 222 female prisoners that arrived fit and healthy out of the 226 that had boarded. Then there was the ship that I didn't mention before called the Guardian, but it plays an important role. It was a converted gunship to convict transport, and Edward Rieu was the shipmaster, and it left on the 12th of September 1789, but it wrecked on the trip and it never arrived. It had 20 male convicts did eventually arrive after being picked up by other ships in the fleet. 25 had boarded. Then there was the Justinian, which was a store ship. I believe it was carrying soldiers as well to make up the New South Wales Corps. Then there was the Surprise. It was a converted merchant ship to convict transport, and Nicholas Anstis was its master. It had 218 male convicts arrive from the 254 that had boarded. Then we get to the notorious Neptune, which was a convict transport ship. It had formerly done slave trading journeys, and its shipmaster was predominantly Donald Trail. It's actually really difficult to find the actual numbers of deaths on board the Neptune because the surgeon's journal is mysteriously missing from history. That's convenient. It had 421 male convicts that boarded, plus 12 male convicts from the shipwreck, the Guardian. It also had 78 female convicts that boarded. Then there was the Scarborough, which was a converted transport to a convict ship. And its shipmaster was John Marshall, who was a notoriously paranoid man. 180 male convicts arrived from the 253 male convicts who boarded, and plus 8 male convicts from the Guardian shipwreck. Now, we're going to be predominantly talking about the Neptune today. The Neptune was a 3-decker East Indiaman launched in 1780 at Deptford. She made 5 voyages for the British East India Company, the last one transporting convicts to Port Jackson as one of the vessels on the notorious Second Fleet, under contract to former slave traders. And this is important. G'day, Brady. Contractors bid on a fixed price per head basis, with the contract being given to the lowest bidder. Neptune, along with Scarborough and Surprise, was chartered by the slave traders Camden, Calvert and King at a considerably lower rate than any other tenders. The contractors were paid for the number of people who boarded the ships in Britain, not for the number who arrived. There was no incentive for the contractors to treat the prisoners with care. In fact, it was quite the opposite, because contractors were able to sell any leftover provisions at the end of the voyage. So ruthless captains like Trail withheld food from the prisoners and sold them on for great profit. Donald Trail, the Neptune's replacement captain, was described by many as a vicious sadist even before this journey. Elizabeth MacArthur described him in her diary as a perfect sea monster. Neptune was only one of this group of ships in the Second Fleet to transport female convicts, the other one being the notorious Lady Juliana. And the Navy Board issued specific orders stipulating that women were to be kept separate and not abused or ill-treated. The women were unchained and housed in a section of the upper deck and had, even though they had many more liberties than the Neptune's male convicts, who were confined in filthy conditions, receiving inadequate rations, and they were chained together in what was considered barbarous irons. And it's got to be pretty bad for the 1700s to be described like that. While the female convicts were certainly better off than their male counterparts, this came at a real cost to every woman on the ship. Unfortunately, it's kind of only too easy to understand what young women might have been forced to do just to survive this voyage. The affair of the hell ship Neptune, Sydney Morning Herald, 10th of February 1945, reported that at night, however, the ship's company invaded the rooms of the women, whom they carried off to their own quarters to do as they pleased. The barbaric conditions and resulting desperately high mortality rates of the Second Fleet were a direct result of the privatisation of the fleet. The First Fleet had been an expensive but very effective exercise. All aspects of the expedition were closely monitored by Governor Phillip. Importantly, on the First Fleet, the ships stopped 3 times along the way to ensure supplies of fresh food and water. In order to cut costs, the second fleet operations were contracted out and they only made one stop. This fleet has since, this fleet has since been known as the Death Fleet, as its mortality rate was the highest in the history of transportation to Australia. Even before it left, the Neptune's horrors were becoming apparent. On the Neptune was Lieutenant John Shapcoat. He was the naval agent whose duty it was to see that the convicts received their full rations and the best possible treatment. I think he might have failed. He had one job, John Shapcoat. Apparently he did fail in his duty. The crew too was very disorderly, and it was reported that they were inclined to be riotous throughout the voyage. Before the Neptune left London, Shapcoat put every single male convict in irons because he was not even going to begin to risk an uprising of any kind. Even while in the river, before departing England, many of them died. Their bodies were just thrown overboard. And when a search was made before departure for concealed weapons, nearly 100 knives were found. So overboard, into the river, those poor souls went too. This is what's really difficult to find the actual numbers. It's very suspicious to me that no one knows where the surgeon's journal is. Captain Thomas Gilbert started the journey of the Neptune late in 1789, bound for Botany Bay and China, but Gilbert himself did not survive the journey and was replaced by Traill. In company with the Surprise and the Scarborough, Neptune finally sailed from England with 421 male and 78 female convicts on the 19th of January 1790. At some point on the voyage, Gilbert had died, and his replacement as master was the notorious slave trader Donald Traill. Neptune arrived at the Cape of Good Hope on the 13th of April 1790, and that is where the Guardian had wrecked after crashing into an iceberg. And they spent 16 days there taking on provisions from the wreck and 12 male convicts from the Guardian, and it was wrecked. It was a miracle, actually, that there was any survivors. Heavy weather resulted in Neptune and Scarborough parting from the Surprise, with Neptune arriving at Port Jackson 160 days out from England. A total of 1,026 convicts embarked in January 1790, and over the course of the next 160 days, 267 of them, 26%, that's 1/4 of them, had died. And 158 of those deaths were on one ship, and that was the Neptune. The convicts of the Neptune were treated horrendously. They were kept chained below decks for the entire voyage. Those suspected of even the pettiest theft, or probably didn't even just like the look of them, were flogged to death. Now, that's not a nice death. That's not humane at all. Food rations were pitiful, and convicts were deliberately starved so they could make more money. Scurvy and other diseases ran rife. Witnesses reported seeing men with gaping wounds so deep from wearing irons for the duration of the voyage that their bones were exposed. Upon their arrival at Port Jackson, the convicts were half naked or entirely naked, and they were lying without any bedding, many too ill to move, many unable to walk, and they were simply just slung over the side of the ship like they were cargo, it was reported. Dysentery was rampant. Onlookers were shocked to see men with bloated stomachs, bent over with cramps, others with legs that were swollen and purple, others barely clinging to life with blackened gums and loose teeth, grimacing in agony with scurvy. Stories quickly spread about the cruel use of the irons. Convicts even concealed the deaths of their mates so that they could try and use their rations just to survive. This is one of the worst accounts from the Neptune, is that starving men were forced to eat oatmeal poultices from the corpses. And a poultice was like a little cheesecloth package of oatmeal that they'd put on a wound to try and stop infection. So these are like pus-ridden, blood-ridden oatmeal packages, and they had to eat them to live. Reverend Johnson was appalled at what he saw in Port Jackson, later writing, "The misery I saw amongst them was unexpressible. Their heads, bodies, clothes, blankets were all full of lice. They were wretched, naked, filthy, dirty, lousy, and many of them utterly unable to stand, to creep, or even stir hand and foot, covered over almost with their own nastiness. I spoke to them as I passed along, but the smell was so offensive that I could scarcely bear it. Upon their being brought up to the open air, some fainted, some died on the deck, and others in the boat before they reached the shore. Some creeped upon their hands and knees, and some were carried upon the backs of others." Isn't that sad? Gosh. On Neptune, the convicts were not given enough food. They were kept tied up with chains, and they were never allowed up onto the deck. On the Scarborough, it wasn't much better. They were also part of the death fleet, but they were fed. But there was a reported mutiny attempt, which led to the convicts all being kept locked up below the deck. And afterwards, the commander of the guard, Captain William Hill, criticised the Neptune's shipmaster, Donald Trail, and he wrote, "The more they can withhold from the unhappy wretches, the more provisions they have to dispose of at a foreign market. And the earlier in the voyage they die, the longer they can draw the deceased's allowance to themselves." He added that the slave trade is merciful compared with what I have seen in this fleet. Just think about that for a minute. Like, nothing nice about the slave trade, but how does it get worse? Apparently it was. Judge Advocate David Collins was also appalled. He wrote, "Both living and dead exhibit more horrid spectacles than has ever been witnessed in this country. Up to 10 people died per day in the week after their arrival." The government of the day had really made an error, especially when they contracted the firm Camden, Calvert and King, which was a firm with a previous history as a slave trader, to transport the convicts for a fee of roughly £17 per head. This included the convicts' clothes, food, everything they would need. The company was paid for the convicts whether or not they survived the entire voyage. It was almost like they had an incentive for them to die quickly. Less food to the convicts meant more profit to the company, and if the convict died, even more money was made. You know, after their return to England on the 9th of June 1792, Donald Trail and chief mate William Elgerton were privately prosecuted for the murder of an unnamed convict, along with a seaman named Andrew Anderson and a cook named John Joseph. This is really quite frustrating. After a trial lasting 3 hours, Sir James Marriott in the Admiralty Court, the jury acquitted both men on all charges, and this is a quote, "without troubling the judge to sum up the evidence." What? They never let the judge hear the evidence. They decided there was nothing to see here. And there were no public prosecutions, as public prosecutions in Britain did not exist until 1880. Later, and this gets even more tragic, the lawyer who brought the charge was struck from the rolls and not allowed to practice law anymore. The Neptune came to its sorry end when a fire and explosion in 1796 at Cape Town finally destroyed the hell ship Neptune. Amongst the arrivals on the death fleet on the Neptune was Darcy Wentworth. He made one of the convicts, Catherine Crowley, pregnant once they had gotten to port. And subsequently, William Wentworth was born on Norfolk Island. And William Wentworth is special for lots of reasons, but one, that there is actually a photograph of him. And I believe it's one of the only photographs of anyone who came in on the fleets. John MacArthur and his wife Elizabeth and their son Edward MacArthur left England on the Neptune, but they transferred to the Scarborough after a terrible quarrel with Captain Trail. They were not going to, they knew something was wrong. They were just fortunate enough to be free settlers. Despite an outcry in London after details became public, the Navy Board did not impose any financial penalty on the contractor. Incredibly, the same company bought out the Third Fleet in 1791. However, changes had been made to the contracts and policies. Incentives were then put in place to encourage contractors to keep convicts alive by paying bonuses. Therefore, it kept the death rate quite low. The story of the Death Fleet is a tragic mix of a group of selfish contractors intent on cutting corners, a captain so paranoid about security he refused to let convicts up on deck for fresh air, and another captain whose previous job had been overseeing slave ships. What could have possibly gone wrong? Humans are awful, aren't they, sometimes? You know, those greedy, money-hungry folks. The Second Fleet was a grim example of privatisation gone wrong in the most catastrophic way. The worst ship of all was the Neptune. Of the 499 that were on board, only 72 arrived in reasonable health. 158 died, 269 were incapacitated at the time of landing. Many people alive today in Australia are descended from the Second Fleet. So it's a major and brutal part of our history that should not be forgotten. I was not taught that in school. I can tell you that. Yeah, it's a great photo, isn't it, Keely? Gosh, when I was reading this, I thought this has got to be one of the most shocking true stories I've ever researched. And may God rest their poor souls. It was actually Kaz who was telling me about a particular ship in one of the fleets that had a terrible time. And there was another one also that I might do a story on too, but I think, it was William Wentworth. And it's a great photo. I wish actually I've got to figure out a way that I can show you photos and things, because it's a great photo, because there's actually a lot of illustrations of the state of these poor wretches. Like when I think about them eating the oatmeal poultices, like imagine being that hungry that you had to steal that off a corpse. You had to like try and extend your chain to get to the corpse to eat that. You know, it's awful when you think about it. Like that's, we don't learn about these things in school. And frankly, I think we should, because how bad does it have to be considered to make slave trading, which was awful and their conditions were awful, look merciful? Like it was stupid to not give them any incentive to keep them alive. But then again, I guess you presume that people are going to be humane about things. But these folk, they lost their humanity probably sometime before, after a long time slave trading. Yeah, Keely Boyd, apparently there is a lot of descendants, maybe not so much from the Neptune, there would be some, but there's a lot of descendants, obviously, from the Lady Juliana. I mean, those women were the grandmothers of Australia, the floating brothel. But from the Neptune, I believe there was, but there was such a high death rate even after they reached the shore. I have heard of the Batavia Simon Powell. Like I said, I grew up in WA and we learnt an awful lot about that. So it's really awful. They can, Daz. It's just awful, isn't it? I'd like to think there wouldn't be people alive who would do this today, but you know what? You think of those greedy corporations, and there is still slavery going on today, you know. Who makes your shoes? Who makes your clothes, you know? It's just probably hidden away from us, probably like this was intended to be hidden away. I mean, when you think about it, there are probably horrors we'll never know about. And that is really sad. So spare a thought for those wretched, wretched souls. All right, let's have a Captain Cook at the news today. Well, Victoria has entered another lockdown due to another outbreak. Hopefully, businesses in the state will be able to recover from the open and shut they've been living with since the beginning of the pandemic. I really feel for business owners and the folk who work for them. Also, the first Tasmanian devil joeys have been born on the Australian mainland for more than 1,000 years. The tiny joeys were found in their mother's pouch after an insurance colony of the animals was introduced to the mainland to help save the animal from extinction from the deadly tumour that has been plaguing them here in Tasmania. And that tumour slashed their numbers by 90%. So that's actually awesome news. Get busy, mainland devils. We need lots more joeys. Today, in history, on May the 28th, in 1923, the US Attorney General says it is legal for women to wear trousers anywhere. How kind. Today, in 1936, Alan Turing submits On Computable Numbers for publication, in which he set out the theoretical basis for modern computers. My pick for 3 historical characters to spend an evening with today are, well, the incredible Alan Turing, of course. That's a sad story of a brilliant genius. Pythagoras and Archimedes, all famous mathematicians, and perhaps they could help me get a better grasp on even the most basic mathematics, because I am terrible at it. Yeah, exactly, Jodie. It's really awful. Yeah, Daz, the devils do need some blue pills. They absolutely need to. That's exactly right, Carl. We have it so good, and all the people complaining today about the tiny, microaggressions and things. I think, really, you live in the best time in history. You've got food. You've got a good chance of getting a job. We live in the best countries. And you could still find things to complain about. Like, you complain about words when these people were so hungry they ate those oatmeal poultices. We got nothing to complain about. We should be grateful every day. I really think we should. Anyway, as always, it has been absolutely wonderful to share a small smoko with you all. Please do leave a thumbs up below the screen and subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget to ding my little bell for notifications of all my future uploads. Please consider sharing this so that we can grow this great community into a bigger one and I can actually stand a chance at getting off my L plate. Hello to all my new subs that I've just gained recently. I appreciate you so much. You take me closer to getting off my L plates. Thank you so much for watching. Please do say g'day in the comments or suggest a subject for a future video. I hope you can join me at the same time next week. Have a fantastic weekend. Jodie, you've still got one more day left of your week, but Friday is working out great so far, so it's going to be awesome for you. Have a fantastic weekend. G'day, Stephen Wed. Love and kisses. Bye. See you later, everybody.